So what happens next for one of Africa's oldest aviation companies? Let's explore that in a bit more detail. Let's bring in Sean Mendes, who's an aviation expert, who's joining us now from Blantyre. Sean, thank you for your time this evening. So let's start with the comments from Pravin Gordhan. He says that this deal fell apart because the government couldn't agree on a fair value for 51% of this company. What exactly was the price that the government was looking for here?
Well, it's actually been a rather complex road from the initial announcement of this deal to where we are today. The original Takatso consortium was supposed to be a partnership between three entities, one being Harith Global Partners, which is an infrastructure fund, one being Global Aviation Operations, which is a South Africa-based leasing and operations company, which also has a stake in Lyft, another domestic airline in South Africa, and a third company called Cyranix, which was a management consultant group. However, due to some concerns raised by the Competition Commission in South Africa, Global and Cyranix had to exit from the deal, which left it basically only Harith as the stakeholder remaining in Takatso. Now, the original plan, supposedly, again, none has been announced publicly, but we've got this from other reports and from presentations to Parliament, was that the consortium would pay 51 South African rand, so about $3 to buy a 51% stake in South African Airways, and would make a commitment to investing 3 billion rand further, which is about 160 million US dollars, towards the recapitalization and growth of the company. Now, obviously, the Department of Public Enterprises feels that with the restructuring of the Takatso Group and in terms of what it brings to the table, the 51 rand sale price, as well as the commitment to recapitalization, is insufficient for the government's objectives. And accordingly, Minister Gordhan this week has announced that that Takatso and the government have mutually agreed to terminate this transaction. So we're back to square one. South African Airways remains 100% government-owned, and government remains on the hook for losses and whatever else.
Indeed, and I just want to pick up on that, because the other thing that the Public Enterprises Minister said was, at no stage will SAA get money from the fiscus. That's a direct quote from him. But, SAA has had a history of bleeding money for the better part of a decade, I believe 11 years and counting. So if SAA isn't going to get more money from taxpayers, where can he get money to keep running? Can it remain as a going concern?
That is a 38.1 billion rand question. And, the reality is no one really knows what has been happening with South African Airways in the last 3 years financially. Officially, when South African Airways emerged from business rescue in 2021, the South African government officially provided them a 10.5 billion rand bailout. So that's about 550 million US dollars. However, the Auditor General reports, which have been tabled to Parliament in the last few weeks, I should note that these have been very carefully qualified by the Auditor General, stating that they're unable to prepare credible financial statements due to inadequate record keeping, misstatement, and a lack of capacity to prepare these statements. So, you must take them with a pinch of salt. But basically, the government has put in 27.6 billion rand or $1.4 billion into South African Airways since they exited business rescue, while the official records say just $560 million. That is a big question, because if South African Airways claims that they are currently cash positive and nominally profitable, where is this $1.5 billion going? There have been also highlights made of irregular expenditures of $2.3 billion over the last 4 years, and wasteful expenditures of, fruitless and wasteful expenditures, to quote the Auditor General report, of 207 million rand or $11 million. So, whether or not South African Airways is going to receive more money, it is fairly clear from this very damning Auditor General report that the money they have already received is not being utilized appropriately. And, I think any reasonable person must question whether there is a future for this airline without further bailouts or recapitalization.
All right, so let's step back a little bit and try and take the optimistic, shall we say, angle to this particular story. SA as a business, right, it's got a fleet of around 13 or so aircraft, I believe, that are operating at the moment. There were plans, of course, to expand the fleet, to grow a little bit. And they do have, market share in specific parts of the continent where there is demand, right, for aviation services. Is there any other company that might be looking at SA and thinking, there's an asset I'd like to buy?
I think when an SA initially was looking for partners, it was a very opaque process. The government never announced whether there were any other businesses or potential bidders. They just announced that Takatso had been chosen. And I think the main concern that any potential investor is going to have in this is, number one, looking at where things went with the Takatso deal. It took 3 years for them to get to a point where the deal fell apart because A, the government tried to renegotiate an agreed valuation. B, the Competition Commission stepped in and imposed conditions which, potentially made the deal unviable. And C, the government has basically said that they want to retain control now. Even if a strategic partner comes in, and it's a very foolish person who's willing to put in their money and surrender control to an entity that has shown a horrendous track record of not being able to use money responsibly over the last multiple decades.
Indeed, and that sort of preempts my next question, because I was going to ask, from a political perspective, we can argue about the economics of making the business work properly, but in principle, the ANC would probably be opposed to having Africa's largest and, at this point, the only profitable carrier on the continent, really, Ethiopian Airlines, take a stake in SA, because other than maybe the big Gulf carriers, who else is in a position to actually step in?
Well, South African Airways has been talking about creating a pan-African airline together with Kenya Airways for the last couple of years. That's been a bit of a political fight for him. It's a bit like, two drunks getting together at a bar and trying to convince each other to stop drinking. Both of them have been in such poor condition. But I think, again, Ethiopian Airlines have expressed their willingness to assist South African Airways with this. But Ethiopian is not going to come in as a financial investor. If Ethiopian were to get involved with this, it's going to be as a strategic partner, as an operational partner. And that's not really where South African Airways needs the assistance. South African Airways has strong technical capability. They have people there who supposedly do know how to run airlines and have run successful airlines elsewhere. So Ethiopians' likelihood of getting involved, I'm sure they'd be willing, but I highly doubt that Ethiopians' very conservative and profit-focused management are willing to, to put Ethiopian cash at risk in trying to bail out a South African political boondoggle.